Well, Kara Kelley made me sweat on this episode, and she actually scared me a little bit because Kara specializes in HR compliance, knows a lot about hiring, firing, and clinical HR, and a whole slew of things. She's also pretty well connected in the compliance and HIPAA industry. And man, if you thought AI was going to be your buddy when it comes to HR related issues, think again. This episode is going to scare you enough to want to invest in people like Kara or somebody else that really knows a thing or two about HR. Something I learned is that things you put into AI can be used against you in an employment hearing. So if you think that ChatGPT or Claude is your HR friend as you're mulling over how to handle a difficult employee, think again. That stuff can actually be used against you in court. So even though AI might seem like your buddy, it's not going to stand up for you in court. Ouch. Well, Kara is a very knowledgeable person, and this episode is gonna wake you up a little bit. Here is Kara Kelley on The Real Talk of Dental. Kara Kelley, welcome to The Real Talk of Dental. I'm really excited to have you on because you are definitely a real talker, and we bonded recently talking about events, and you're on the road quite a bit. You have attended and spoken at a lot of events, so you have a lot of experience in that space. And one of the things we were talking about was just really understanding the value of events. And it's been an ongoing conversation recently with whether or not people are getting ROI on the events that they attend as costs continue to rise, and a lot of people are getting priced out, and you see the same talking heads on stages everywhere. So that was something that you and I had a sidebar conversation about, and then it led to, having you come on and share as well, because you also specialize in HR, which is such a hot topic. And we can certainly talk about the event stuff for sure. And I also want to talk to you a bit about the use of AI and people thinking that they can AI their way through HR, which I think is being used more and more. I've witnessed it myself. And then I'm always like, time out. You need to call a professional, especially in regards to whatever state you're in. So where have you been seeing, or what's your experience lately been with AI and people using it to replace HR or make decisions that you cringe at probably on a daily basis?
Oh, yes. Daily basis. First of all, thank you for having me. I love this podcast. I love the guests that you've had on, and I love the fact that it is real talk. For your question, I have seen a lot lately, a lot of people using AI to answer employment law questions for themselves or for their team members. I've seen people try to use it to create employee handbooks, which is cute. I saw recently, I actually talked about this with Alan Twigg of Ben Erickson as well, one of their podcast episodes recently, that I had a potential client that sent me their handbook that they had been working on, and it was a whole 18 pages. You could totally tell it was ChatGPT. It was for a very employee-friendly state, meaning lots and lots of policies, lots of different leaves, lots of laws you don't want to mess up. And it got even the basics wrong, like your break laws wrong. The way that it was phrased was that you get 30 minutes if you work an 8-hour shift in that state. Very much that would be something that would get reported on. And so even just like I said, some of the basics on this, just you don't know where it's pulling the information from. You don't know if it's compliant. Like you mentioned, there's going to be a lot of things that are state specific. The other area that I see a lot of practices using AI and that they need to be careful in is something that I recently made a Facebook post about, that whenever you have conversations with AI, it may seem safe, it may seem private, it may seem secure, you may have told it not to train the model. If it ends up in an employment decision that ends up in court, either somebody was terminated or disciplined, they feel discriminated against, whatever the case may be, that's not privileged conversation. That's the same thing running a Google search or typing an email to somebody. Even to myself, I talk to my clients and I say, look, I'm an HR advisor. I'm not an attorney. I don't give legal advice. This conversation is not legal advice, just for that disclaimer. Anything that you share with me isn't going to be privileged. And so there may be some times where we need to get on a call instead of you typing some things out and making that, a subpoenable record, a business record in the event of litigation. And we're starting to see court cases that are deciding that AI chats and AI searches and terms and prompts that you're using can be something that ends up in court and can be used potentially against you. So if you're going to have those conversations and you're putting in all of this emotional, this and that, something, for example, like, I have an employee and I just hired her and she just let me know she's pregnant and I want to fire her. How do I do that? That's not to look great in front of a jury. So anything you type into your chat, whatever you decide to use, whatever AI platform you're using, Claude, Chat, Perplexity, better make sure that it's something that you're okay, having read in front of a jury, because you never know, one day it might be.
That's a big one. I'm guessing most people don't know that. So that's pretty terrifying.
It's the same thing as your Google searches. It's the same thing, your emails. It's all business record. And if you're using it to make business decisions and are not careful, and it goes both ways. There's some that I'm seeing as far as court cases that are coming up where they're saying it's work product, and others are saying, no, that's actually something that you tried to put that information in and tried to get a way to fire somebody because they were whatever protected class, did whatever the thing was, put your emotion-filled real talk into the AI bot, and whatever answer it spit out, you made decisions based on that. So yeah, that could be something that you have to defend in the future.
Yeah, and because AI really comes across as like your friend and your confidant, but it will turn against you when
And that's the other part of it, is it tells you what you want to hear.
Yeah.
It's not going to tell you, well, you probably shouldn't do this, or you should probably go talk to an attorney or an HR advisor. It's going to tell you, well, this is how you accomplish what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, in very fine print, sometimes it's like, Claude can make mistakes, don't believe everything. But yeah, I find chat for sure makes more errors than, yeah. I mean, the more you use AI, for me, the more I realize how inaccurate it is. And then I'm like, screw this, I'll just do something different. Yeah, that's incredibly frustrating. Are you seeing that more and more where, like, are you in a position now in your line of work where you're combating like the use of AI, for example?
Pretty frequently. And like I said, it's usually because somebody's decided to draft a policy with it or do some research with it and come to me with hey, this is what it's saying. Is this right? It's not. Because, AI is pulling from the information that makes sense to it. Or like I said, they're trying to give you information you want to hear. And so it may pull something from a 50 states list, for example. You may something about lunch breaks or final pay, and it will say, well, in this state, whatever answer you're wanting to hear. And it's actually pulling it from a list that has all 50 states, and it pulls your state name and pulls the answer from somebody else's state. And it's not actually giving you the correct information. I've seen this for years with Gemini, or whatever Google's AI is. Whenever you type something into a Google search, it'll pull it up at the top, and people sometimes won't scroll any further than that. I saw it for probably a good solid year, where it was trying to say that full-time hours in New Jersey were 25 and up. And that's not correct. That was on one PDF for an insurance policy that said that, full-time employees for that specific policy in that state was 25 hours and up. It is not full-time employment starts at 25 hours. It's still, under ACA at the federal level, still, 30 in a week or 130 in a month. So
Wow. Yeah. What are some other issues that you're seeing like consistently across the board with HR related stuff these days that people tend to be blind about?
right now, one of the things that I've been diving deep on is what gets a candidate to click apply on a job post. And I started diving into that because I'm still hearing conversations of people saying they can't hire for whatever position it is. I've been trying to hire a hygienist for a year and nobody's applying. I've been trying to hire an assistant and I'm just not getting good applicants. And so I'm wondering, where are the good applicants? Why are they not clicking apply? And diving into that, also kind of coupled with AI, I tried to use AI for that search, and it's not pulling anything really reasonably accurate on some of that, or it's not diving as deep as I want it to. And so I'm actually doing all of this manually. I'm probably at like 200 plus job posts right now, going through and actually manually looking and seeing what are people putting on a job post and how does that really line up with what candidates are actually asking for. And part of my testing in all of this is to have ChatGPT or Claude or Perplexity write me a job post. And what it's doing is basically pulling the same thing everybody else shares. And it's not actually giving you all the details that the candidates are looking for. And so same thing, where it's just going to pull you something templated the way we've always done it, whatever's out there. It's not actually necessarily going to give you what you need because it only works off of what you tell it.
Exactly. Yeah. And everything just starts to look the same, right? Yeah. I mean, just totally unrelated, but my husband and I went to New Orleans, I don't know, last year or something like that. And I think he used chat for just some ideas and where to go when we were there. And I had been there a couple times before, but he had never been there. And we went to this one like off the beaten path venue. And when we got there, there were like mobs of people there, and it was like kind of unusual. And I looked at him and I was like, I think it's because everyone used ChatGPT for their like itinerary. And I was like, it's sending everyone to these same places. And I don't know if maybe some of these businesses are like finding their way to be part of like Chat's algorithm or something. But yeah, it was like kind of comical to me because it's like, and also sad at the same time. But everyone uses Chat, and Chat's just telling everyone the same stuff. And I was even in a mastermind once, and we were talking about like names for our alter egos and names for this mastermind we were in, and Chat was giving us all the same responses, and each of us thought we were really special until we all had the same responses, and we're just like, what the hell? It's giving me the same answers too, And yeah, it's just we become this homogenized, mega brain, all getting like the same output. And it's a little creepy when you start to really think about it.
It is. And I know that that's going to be the way that people search for us in the future. And I know we have to, as business owners, whether you're a dental practice or a consultant who's working with dental practices, are going to have to find a way to combat some of that and this ever-changing algorithm that is moving at lightning speed. I've had similar struggles this last year where I'm like, oh, okay, I think I've got it worked out. And it's pulling me up just about, the top 5 for HR compliance speakers every time I do the search, or for HR companies every time I do the search. And then it'll drop off for a couple of weeks, and then it'll come back. And so it keeps changing. And I'm not sure that there's going to ever be a consistent way to always be the one that's found, not without spending quite a bit of money. I think in your example, it was probably pulling from a lot of like top 10 destination places. TripAdvisor will put those out, or they'll look at maybe some reviews, and it looks at a lot of those best lists whenever it pulls the data for you.
Yeah, for sure. So something that you also talk about is just this idea of being, a CEO and owner, and then also leadership and being sort of the face of, dental companies. And I really agree with you on that. And it's something that I talk about a lot too, is I always say self-awareness is the key to the kingdom, and really understanding, your zone of genius, or like what are you really great at? And I was honestly just on a couple calls earlier today with teams and, even owner doctors, and talking about, hey, just because you're really skilled at a couple things doesn't mean that you're great at all the things. And I think it's this like loop, or, something we get stuck on. It's like a mental block where we can be really successful. Say we're really successful financially, like our businesses are doing well financially. Somehow we convince ourselves that, oh, I'm a great leader. It's like, well, no, you might just be really great at managing the finances of a company, or you know how to invest well, or whatever. And you have some people that are like fantastic clinicians, and you can be an amazing dentist, and maybe you get lots of props and accolades, and maybe you're out speaking, in front of large rooms of people talking about your clinical mastery. It doesn't mean that you're a great leader. It doesn't mean that you're a great communicator. It doesn't mean that you're great at all of these other things because you're a master at like maybe 1 or 2 things. And the reality is most of us are really good at probably like 3 things. Like the real reality. And then it's like, where do we need to bring in help? Like, oh, okay, I need this person to support me in this area, influence me in this area, or collaborate, or something like that. I love that you mentioned that. And I love that you talk about that, because you probably see it all the time, that a lot of teams are operating under mediocre leadership or terrible leadership or whatever, by people who are convinced that they're actually really good at it because they might be good at something else, right? What's your take on that? And what do you see? What are some of your stories around that?
I mean, leadership is definitely a skill set that not everybody is innately born with. It is something that can be developed as long as you are coachable and are willing to actually look at what you are doing and admit that this is probably not my strong point. This is something that I do need to work on. And sometimes you get the signals that we miss. Sometimes it's things like high turnover, for example. If you've got some significantly high turnover and it's not the result of, like a super low paying market, it's not the result of everybody's leaving because maybe they have a military spouse or they're all retiring out or something like that. If you've got turnover that is, significantly high, you really should start looking at your leadership, whether it's yours specifically, or if you're in like a larger group practice, maybe it's your frontline leaders, your practice administrators, or even your associates and their leadership skills. I do see a lot of this. I saw a post probably a year or two ago, I guess at this point, where somebody was saying, hey, I make this much money as an associate and I have an opportunity to buy this practice where I could make possibly this much, but here's my reservations. And it was a couple of different things that they listed as to why they might not want to actually purchase the practice and go into ownership. And one of those things was, I don't really think I like managing a team, but I'll do it if I have to. And I'm like, ooh, that right there, that's probably not the best start, because guess what? If you're going to own a solo practice, you're going to have to be able to lead a team. And if that's something you're already saying, I'm probably not that good at, and I don't really want to do it, maybe you should stick with being an associate as a possibility. I also, as speakers, I also see some people get on stages and they share how they built their business and how they've been so successful, but they don't actually, put in the little asterisks there, little caveats that say, I actually did it this way and this is probably not the right way to do it. But a lot of times, for example, I've talked to leaders who speak on leadership and they aren't paying their team when it comes to CE, for example, or they've misclassified their hygienist as 1099 when they should be W-2, or they're recommending that people do things like working interviews when they bring on team members, which is not good for the practice. It's not, I have a whole spiel on that. Let me get my slides kind of level of working interviews and why I disagree with them. I saw one recently that was speaking and said that before you look to hire an associate, you should consider what gender you want to hire. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And this is like a highly respected, well-known leadership speaker that was telling a room full of practice owners and associates that they should look at the gender of somebody before they even look at hiring. I'm like, no.
Wow. Hey, I just want to pop in on today's episode and talk to you about this new GPT I wrote called Boundary Boss GPT. And it's for those moments where you've said yes to something and immediately felt that pit in your stomach, or maybe you've now written 5 drafts of an email because you're trying not to sound mean, even though you're exhausted and you swear you've said this thing so many times to the same person, or you're kind of sick and tired of staying late, taking it on, smoothing things over, and wonder why you're the one that's always burning out. A lot of the conversations that I have on this podcast, we often hear about people hitting these walls of burnout and oftentimes not even knowing what to say. So that's why I built Boundary Boss GPT. It's kind of like having me in your pocket when you're about to respond to a text, email, or team issue, and you just don't know what to say because your people-pleasing brain is completely hijacking you. This is going to help you have clarity, confidence, and self-respect without the guilt, over-explaining, or the drama. Go ahead and grab it in the show notes below. It's totally free, and you're going to love it. Okay, now back to this awesome conversation. Talk to me about the working interviews and why you're against working interviews.
First of all, because they don't really work. And it was funny because he was giving examples of like, well, you want to see if they like make eye contact with their assistant. He's talking about hiring associates. Make eye contact with the assistant. I'm like, you can do that in a conversation with them. Do they make eye contact in a conversation? Okay, well then they're more likely to make eye contact when they're working. Like you don't need them to actually come and do. He was recommending a half day of production for the associate to come in and do just that for free. So there's a couple of reasons when it's an associate or somebody who's certified why you shouldn't, because if they're coming from out of state, they may not have a license there. You may not be able to bill under their name because that's not credentialed. You have potential HIPAA violations if you are dealing with somebody who's not an employee of the practice, who is working on patients of the practice. That's HIPAA. You have workers' comp issues if they get injured while they're on site or during the course of work. You have general liability issues if the patient somehow gets injured because somebody's working with them and they were not an employee, you were just using them as a guinea pig. But then the main point to it is that it doesn't really work. You don't always learn everything you need to know about that person. I would rather see somebody do an actual situational judgment interview with them and a skills assessment where we have a checklist of things that we're trying to assess, both soft skills and technical skills, if you want to assess that, to kind of see how they operate within your practice. And so that might look like if you were hiring somebody who needed to answer the phones, for example, that might look like saying, okay, we have this script and I'm going to show you how we like the phone to be answered. And then I'm going to have you practice it. And then we're going to have somebody call in, one of your other team members, spouse, friend, whatever, call in and pretend to be a new patient. And I want you to use the script and I want you to follow along and let's see how you do on the phone with this patient. And see how they do, see if they're able to, to adapt to real time, see if they get frustrated, see if they, hang up on the person, if they get, nervous. Do they turn around and ask you the question? Do they turn around and ask somebody else a question? Do they go try to Google or use AI for it? Like, how do they actually operate while they're doing these assessment tasks? And that way you can look at, like I said, just not just the actual tactical skills of can they answer the phone, but you can look at what are those soft skills you're looking for as well. Same with assistants and setting up trays. Same with an insurance coordinator running through an EOB, or setting up a new patient in your software. You're not looking to see whether or not they 100% are an expert at that software. You're looking to see where they're at. Do they need more training? They said that they could do it. I hear this one all the time. Well, I hired this person. They said, oh, they have all this experience with our software, and they just don't know how to do anything. I'm like, well, did you test any of that? Well, no, I hired for personality, and I hired for, I was told to hire for that and not skills. I'm like, well, okay, but that's also part of it, of like, how honest are they being about their level of experience? And if they can't get into your training account or your dummy account or fake patient account or whatever, don't obviously violate HIPAA with this. If they can't get into that account and set up a new patient, set up an appointment, so, run through your checklist of things, then they clearly aren't the expert they claim to be. And how much training are you really going to give them? And also, what happens whenever they hit a wall and they're not really sure what to do? What happens if you come up to them, midway through and say, hey, I also want you to do this thing? Do they panic? Do they freak out? Like, those are the little things you're looking for. And if you haven't tested those things, then you tell me, well, they said they knew how to do this and I just took them at their word for it. I'm going to say that's a you problem. And guess what? So is the employment office.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on calling past employers and getting recommendations and things like that? That's something that I've often see people don't do, because you're reminding me of a client I had many years ago, hired somebody, and it was for front office, and it was actually in chiropractic. It wasn't in dental, but they ended up finding out this person had no idea, what the hell they were doing, and they had business history on their resume. And I had asked, I wasn't really intimately involved in this hiring process. It was before we were really doing a lot of work together. And I said, well, did you call any of the previous employers? And they said, no, I didn't even think about calling anybody. And I thought that was really interesting, just to get some feedback. But now they do it moving forward if the person gives them permission to call. But it usually gives you a pretty good idea of, because people lie. A lot of people lie on resumes as well. The dental office I was working with, they applied, and, we looked at the website of the office they said they were currently working at as the office manager, and they were nowhere found on the website. And we thought, well, maybe it's an outdated website, even though they said they had been there for many years. we went to the Instagram, and they had all these recent photos on the Instagram account, and this person was nowhere to be found. And it was just so eerie, because we're like, oh my gosh, they're lying about their job history.
So a couple of things there. You're talking reference checks when you call the employer.
Reference checks. There you go.
Checks when you're talking about calling the employer. Yes, you should always have permission for something like that. There's a couple of schools of thought on whether you should do them or not. I'll get to that in a second. Checking the online social, if you do background checks and you actually pay a company, you are not also supposed to then go and conduct your own. FYI.
Okay.
And here's also why, because you might get a misconception like that. And I'm not saying in your case it was not, but for example, what if this person had been a domestic abuse victim and they asked to have their picture on the website for security reasons, that they've, left an abusive situation, and they, are trying to create a new life for themselves, and they don't want to be found online. They don't have any socials. They don't want to be on the practice social. That's one of those valid reasons that I would actually tell a practice, don't force your team to have their picture on. Now, if it's I just don't like how I look, not so much that. But if it's a legitimate situation that I really don't want to have my picture or be on social media for various reasons, or sometimes it's my spouse has a job that doesn't allow us to have social media and doesn't allow us to be on social media because they've got a high level or sensitive job, with the military, with law enforcement. There's plenty of reasons why people, can't have Facebook accounts, for example, and don't want to be on those social media. So I wouldn't take that as a sign that this person's lying, just as an FYI. But then also, making sure that if you are following Fair Credit Reporting Act and any background check rules that apply in your state, if you are searching for their information, you also have to be careful. In some of your states, you will have what's called ban the box laws, which also means that you can't ask about criminal history until a certain point in the application process. And so if you are searching for that information and you're not that far along, you could potentially be violating state laws and their rights under some of those ordinances. And some of them are city level. So sometimes you're in a not ban the box state, but the city was ban the box. So Texas did finally make the whole statewide ban the box, but Austin was a ban the box city in a non ban the box state for the longest time. So little things like that to be aware of. Reference checks, though. There's two schools of thought on that. Some people will say, well, they're going to lie anyway. They're only going to give me references that are friends or somebody pretending, and nobody's going to tell me anything because everyone's afraid of a lawsuit. They're only going to tell me the last held title, dates of employment, and eligibility for hire, and some don't even do that. And that's fair, and that may be what you get. Sometimes, though, like you mentioned, the last held title is valid, is something that we might want to know. They might have fudged their resume a little bit on that. Dates of employment, same thing. Some people will, you'll see maybe put just the years of employment instead of the months. And so if somebody puts, I worked 2025 to 2026, well, okay, is that December 2025 to February 2026? That's 3 months. Or is it January 2025 to current? Like that changes things. And so sometimes dates of employment are helpful. And so even if you're only getting that information, that might be useful in the getting. So I feel like, yes, it's something that's worth doing with their permission, certainly calling and seeing what you can get. I tell my clients same thing, that, it's best practices to only confirm that information, that there can be people who will file a defamation suit if they are not getting a job, if there's some kind of a financial impact to them. So not getting a job's financial impact because of negative things that you're saying, if they're not true. So do stick to facts. But at the same time, no one is going to sue you for giving a glowing recommendation. So if this is a team member that was amazing, you can say that. There's no problem in saying that. But I'm always very careful with all of those things. The last thing, just based on what you were saying, as far as some people lie on their resume, I think there's a big misconception on resumes versus a job application. Resumes to be a marketing document. They do not have to put every single thing that they've ever done on a resume. It is here is my relevant experience for this position, marketing themselves to you as a candidate. So yes, they may have skipped that job that they were only at for 2 weeks. Yes, they may have skipped some experience from 20 years ago. That's okay. They're allowed to do that. A job application, however, if you're asking for certain information, it's one of the reasons you should have them fill it out. That's actually a document that has more legal teeth. And if they're lying on that, that's different. That's where you can say that they falsified information at the beginning of hire if they're not putting all that correct information there. So I would keep that in mind as well. Again, areas not to use templated things or not to just use AI, because a lot of them ask about criminal history as a standard, and it's something that your state may not allow to have on the job application. So I would always check that as well. But making sure that you are treating a resume like a resume and a job application like a job application. And it's, they're not lying on their resume if they didn't include something that might have been irrelevant at that point. They don't to.
Yeah, gosh, there's so much nuance. Yeah, I'm so glad there's people like you, because
And this is why I say AI is not going to be your best help when it comes to something like this, because you asked me one question, I'm like, well, here, let me unpack the 6 different things here. And AI is going to, it only gives you back what you put in. And so you need somebody who understands that nuance. And oh, by the way, here's the few other
humans, it's just, there's so much changing. And just even in the world of hiring and firing, I'm always very much as a coach, I shared with you when we were first chatting, I'm very hands off when it comes to anything that smells like HR or legal stuff. I'm I'm not your person. I do not specialize in this area. Please go seek the professionals, and if I have referrals or recommendations, happy to do that. And I'm also grateful that a lot of the folks I work with usually have folks like that they have on retainer or available or something like that. And that is something too, I think you and I touched on in a previous conversation, is how often coaches will even take some of that stuff on from a place of being helpful, and the reality is it can be catastrophic or not healthy or not wise to listen. So you really have to know who you're listening to for certain things. But just even in the hiring and firing stuff, always really recommend, if people are really desperate for hiring help, it's find a recruiter or even
somebody who specializes.
Yeah, somebody who specializes in it. It's worth it, in my opinion. And then with the releasing of people, it's, call your HR company, attorneys, however you're going about doing it, so that you're set up in a way that really protects you. So with the hiring stuff that you focus on, do you really support offices in hiring, or do you also support individuals that are looking for work, or both?
So I'm not a recruiter in and of myself. I do help practices build out their recruiting process. I will partner them with a recruiter if they need somebody who's actually going to actively do that part for them. But a lot of times I feel like, because I work with so many of the first-time practice owners, either through a acquisition or a startup, this is something that they're going to need to do for the next 10, 15, 20 plus years potentially. And so and to
Yeah.
help them feel confident in it and that they don't always have to outsource that. If you're in a difficult area, if you're in maybe a rural area, there's not a lot of candidates, or you're really struggling to hire for some reason, yes, getting somebody in there who can maybe position you candidates, or if it's a specialty position, for example. And that would be, I suppose, one of the few that I will actually help them place is if it's an HR expert. If you need somebody to come in as your HR manager or HR director, somebody who is maybe in an emerging group practice setup where they're trying to hire like their first HR employee, I'm happy to help partner them with somebody who is in the HR space. But as far as like hiring clinical team members or administrative team members, I don't typically place them. I'm not a recruiting agency.
Yeah.
I stay in my lane too, whether it's HIPAA, OSHA, practice management. I have a lot of practice management consultants that I'm happy to point them to. A lot of marketing people I'm happy to point them to. I have HIPAA and OSHA experts all day long. I'm not going to get outside of my niche. I say my niche is an inch wide and a mile deep when it comes to HR and dentistry.
I love that. Yeah. Before we go, share with everybody how did you end up in this like HR cavern that you're in?
Serendipity and adaptability is usually the answer I give to that. I actually started going to school back in 2009. Yeah, 2009 for marketing, took an HR class as a general business credit, fell in love with it and switched my major. And whenever I was finishing up my degree, I had been self-employed in a completely different field. I knew that this was 2012, where we, didn't just hire anybody who showed up on time and sober. We actually looked at their resume and make sure they had experience doing something. And so I'm like, okay, self-employment's not going to be helpful when I go to look for a job with my new shiny business degree with my HR concentration. So while I'm finishing this up, let me go work somewhere for like a year and a half, 2 years, whatever. Find a job doing something for somebody that's not me, so that I have something on my resume. And I actually ended up at a dental CPA firm, of all places. Dental and medical, we worked with quite a few other types of physicians like dermatology, chiropractic, veterinary, those types of practices, as well as dentists being our primary. And so I kind of fell into HR and then fell into working with dentists. And into 2019, beginning of 2020, when I set up my LLC so that I could do more speaking, coaching, training. I ended up separating from the firm in February 2020, a couple weeks before we had a pandemic.
I know.
I know. At which point I did yes, I did. And I did a complete 360 degrees right back to being a consultant that year and ended up doing what I do now. So really, serendipity and adaptability. Just make it work.
Yeah. That's so great. Yeah, and it's been fun seeing you, just from the interwebs, seeing you just kind of skyrocket, because it's so needed. It's so needed. And I think especially now more than ever, and I just share this in my newsletter, but there's just so much talk about AI for obvious reasons, and how it's going to replace, everything that folks like you and I do. But I feel like if anything, it actually is a greater need because of everything that, you just shared at the beginning of this. There's low risk stuff, right? Like, I don't know, if you want to have it write a little bulleted gratitude list to your team for the morning huddle and you can't think of what to say. I mean, as a coach, I'd probably disagree with that too, but there's like low risk stuff that you can get help with, but then there's high risk stuff. Like you're saying, hey, this person is a young female doc and she's getting pregnant and I'm not sure I want to keep her on the team. I mean, that's like pretty high risk conversation, right? That you're going to want somebody like you to talk to about, not run it through Claude. But I don't think people tend to have that emotional intelligence. Like for people like me and you, it's like #duh, right? But for a lot of people, they don't have the awareness to be like, no, this is somebody you want to contact a professional for and really walk you through it, because some people really struggle in knowing like what's high risk, low risk, right? So
some of that it's just as bad as working with a template. Like I've said this for years, that your employee handbook, for example, is not something you want to get off of a Facebook group where you say, hey, I'm looking at updating my employee handbook. Does somebody want to send me theirs? That could be somebody else's who is for a different headcount in a different state. They may have gotten theirs from the DSO that they worked for, and there's rules in there that don't apply because the headcount, for there is higher and they don't apply it at the lower headcount, or various other reasons why somebody went and made some changes and all of a sudden it's not compliant for them or for you. And they're not going to tell you that, oh yeah, here it is and it's not compliant. They're going to say, this is what we've been using. And so whether it's that, whether it's any of the DIY options, like what some payroll companies offer, some other HR companies offer, where you can kind of go through their process and they'll give you some options, but they let you customize. They always have a caveat to theirs, or little disclaimers that say that, we can't be responsible for anything that you customize when you do it. And that's the problem, is those systems will let somebody go in and just change the policy. And so they'll read something, and I've seen this several times actually from a consulting firm that was trying to say that they were giving an employee handbook written by another HR company. And I'm like, well, it used to be, but this is certainly not theirs now, because I, in the first couple of minutes, went through and saw that they were recommending that employees are not allowed to discuss their pay. That's a federal violation, National Labor Relations Act. They were saying that breaks of 10 minutes or less are unpaid breaks, but they have to clock out if the break is any longer than 10 minutes. Well, that's a violation of Fair Labor Standards Act, Department of Labor, which says breaks of 20 minutes or less. That's a federal law, applies to all practices in all states. And that's just a myriad of other things that I've seen that you can go in and change it because you say, oh, well, I don't like this. This doesn't work. And nobody is there to tell you, actually, you need to do this because it's a requirement. So whether that is, like I said, a DIY portal, a template, or AI, there needs to be some level of guidance when it comes to those types of policies, either an attorney, an HR advisor, somebody who's really familiar with your state, not a coach who's trying to be helpful, not a DIY portal or your payroll company that looks like, oh yeah, this looks fine. They sell it to everybody else. Yes, they do. But first of all, is it dental specific? And second of all, what are you going to go in and change while you're creating this that might end up violating a state, federal, or even city ordinance?
Yeah. Well, Kara, thank you so freaking much. This was super helpful. I'm so glad that you were on to share this. I think you're going to scare enough people today that you've scared them into submission, that they will seek out professional help. So thank you so much for being on. You're amazing. And I'll see you out there. I'll see you out there on the road, I'm sure.
Thank you for the invitation. It was such a pleasure.
You just listened to the real talk of dental. If it hit, if it stung, if it made you feel just a little more human, good. That's the point. This isn't about fixing practices, it's about healing people. And if you're brave enough to show up real in this industry, you're my kind of leader. Subscribe, call in, send your wildest workplace confession. And most importantly, don't clean up for anyone. The mess, that's where the magic lives. We'll see you again on the next episode.